Hey, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to On the Run with Beards and Dunn. Beards, we have a guest with us. Before we get to our guest, how about a little update on your knee situation? I think most of our listeners, viewers, and if not, kind of bring them up to speed. What happened to your knee?
Yeah, so I just recently went back to the doctor, and I tell you, Dunn. So when I left the hospital after they put the new knee in on November 1st, the doctor came in the day after surgery, and he says, Dick, listen, he said, if we can get that knee to bend at 90 degrees, I'll be tickled, because when I had you out on the table, on the operating table, I couldn't get it to bend past 90 degrees. But he goes, at 90 degrees, you're going to be able to do pretty much anything you want to. So done. Okay. Last week in PT, I had my physical therapist measure it. I was 110 degrees. So I went back to the doctor here just, a few days ago, and I told the gal, I said, they got it to 110. She goes, what? So now that was really pushing it,
Yeah.
So I'm sitting in a chair. She goes, well, bend it back as far as you can. And without using my other leg to kind of, pull it in as much as I could, I got it to 105. So they were just ecstatic about that. But it looks weird. I got this kind of lump on it down to where the knee hooks into the tibia. And it's real clunky when I walk. And then it's full of fluid. So she wanted to take an x-ray, so they did, and to make sure no parts are broken, and they're not. But she said what could be causing that fluid, so because there was so much damage in the knee, they had to do some sewing up of tissue inside the knee itself into the muscles and tendons. She goes, there could be a little bit of a hole in one of those areas, and hopefully that would scar up. She said that could be the cause of this this fluid coming out. She goes, we'll keep an eye on it, because like she said, she goes, you get fluid in there, and it can lead to an infection too. And that's the last thing I need. So I'm doing ice on it. I'm wearing compression on it to try to help with that. But other than that, I'm feeling good. I walk with a cane because I've fallen twice because of the clunk, when my knee will just kind of collapse. So, and now we got snow, of course, up here in northern Minnesota. So I want to be a little more careful, because the last thing I need to do is fall and break something else.
Please don't.
So,
Please
no.
don't.
So enough on me. I am so excited, Dunn, about our guest today. This is going to be fun.
Well, tell us how. I've never met Gary Saxton before today, and I've gotten to know him over the last few weeks, because he's written a book, and somehow or another, Dick, you got contacted. How'd that work?
Well, so Gary, and welcome, Gary, first off. When did you and I first meet? I can't remember for sure.
Yeah, I remember, Dick. It was at one of the marathons in California, around, I believe it was 2011.
Okay.
And it could have been either the Modesto Marathon, the Napa Marathon, and then subsequently at the Boston Marathon.
I bet it was the Napa Valley Marathon, because for years and years and years, they would bring me out there every year to give a little talk. So I'll bet you it was the one at Napa.
Yeah, we met, and here's a kind of an interesting story. We met, and I had this book. So I got your book, Staying the Course, and then I had Duel in the Sun. And so I say to Dick, I said, I'd like to have you sign this too. But I didn't have it. So Dick says, why don't you mail it to me? So I said, Dick, nah, how about if I just meet you at Boston? So now the chances of that are pretty slim, right? There's thousands of people at Boston, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands maybe. So I said, don't worry, Dick, I'll find you. And so Dick was speaking on a panel there at Boston. And so when I knew that, I knew all I had to do was be in the room. But more than that, I got there just prior, like a couple of minutes prior. And so they're waiting to start. And Dick is up on stage. I go up on stage, and the two of us are standing in the middle of the stage before the whole thing starts. And we're talking like we're old friends. And I have the book, and he has the pen and he starts signing. They're waiting to begin this thing, and they're the two of us right in the middle of the stage there, and Dick is signing the book. So that was another time for sure that we met, and that was sort of that was another great memory.
Yeah. Well, speaking of books, we're so excited. Don, you've got a little introductory bio on Gary, because this is going to be this is an interesting story. It really is.
Well, in all honesty, I just kind of dove into the book, and it didn't take me long to go back to try to figure out who in the world is this guy. Because when you get into the book, you start scratching your head going, he's definitely a nonconformist. I mean, the way he went after this, well, I'll read this little bit of a bio here. It says, Gary Saxton, you're a former military man, an infantry captain, and served in West Berlin, Germany during the Cold War. And I read you were an Army Ranger, Special Forces, French Commando trained. I don't even know what that means, but it sounds pretty impressive. You have several black belts in martial arts. After your military career, you ended that. He became a decades-long career in business, landing executive roles with both public and private technology companies in Silicon Valley, located with locations in the United States and Japan. A graduate of West Point, which is commendable right there, and the Harvard Business School. Beards, I don't know if you and I could get into the Harvard Business School or not. But anyway.
I couldn't.
I know I couldn't either. He began his running journey as a way to address declining health and physical fitness challenges with both aging and a demanding career. And that's what kind of really got me into the book was and we'll just kind of jump in here. In 2007, I think you were age 47.
Correct.
And you had children there looked like young middle school aged kids that were just full of energy. Yeah. And they said, "Hey, Dad, I don't know how this worked. Where there's a local fun run, a 4-miler, and you being with all this training and background that you had, and I can imagine what kind of shape. I'll be honest, Gary, I call you a badass." Right. If Dick and I get in a scrap, we're calling Gary to be there with us.
That's for sure.
And so you went out to do this run, and tell us what happened.
Yeah, well, look, I had realized for a while that, along with the kind of lifestyle that I was leading, and while I was successful in certain areas for sure, business was going great and all that, my health was declining, and I knew that was coming, and that was not something for me that I was comfortable with, and it kind of took a little bit of a wake up call to realize that, and that wake up call was that day. We go out and we're going to do a 4-mile race. My kids are in middle school. They're both getting into running. They have a fantastic running coach who I'm going to give a shout out to named Roger Adams. And so, they were learning the principles from the ground up and they were enjoying it. And I wanted to participate with them. So what's a 4-mile run, right? Anybody can do that. And so we take off, I charge out and they charge out, and charging out is all like relative now, right? So, but in like the first mile and maybe a half, all of a sudden my calf just cramped and hurt and I don't know what was going on, blew out. And so there I am and I got to stop. And I cannot take another step. So I'm anchored against this tree trying to stretch it out, right? And they're worried, like, what are we going to do? So I tell them, go ahead, I'll catch up to you. So, I remember just being right there against that tree and trying to stretch out my calf, watching my little kids at that time, middle school, I don't remember exactly the age, but there they were getting smaller and smaller, disappearing, further ahead. And it was at that moment I said, screw this. I am not going to stay at this tree, and I'm going to fix this problem, and I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to start right now. We will finish together. And I was in so much pain. I didn't know what damage I was going to do. But I knew that I was going to catch up to them and we were going to finish together and that would start something. And so I kind of gave it everything that I had. And, it did, I have to say it was painful, but it did kind of dissipate a little bit. And I eventually caught up to them before we hit Los Gatos, and we ran to the finish line together. It was a big deal to me. And I think to them too, but definitely for me because, I did catch up to them. And that was really the start of turning things around.
Well, Gary, did it at the time, did you ever think it would turn into the journey that it led you to?
Absolutely not, Dick. Absolutely not. Because, and I think back on this about people that set audacious goals and, they look at things like, I'm going to get to this point, but they can't even like have a start. They don't, there's almost like, it's so crazy because they're not even able to get, off the mark initially and create that certainty that the goal is able to be accomplished. So for me, it was, at least initially, it was a little bit of let's run a mile.
Well,
Let's do that.
and I think
And then another one.
Yeah, and I think what you're saying, Gary, it's like that with anything. It's that initial startup phase to get your so-called foot out the door. That can be the hardest part. Once you get going, then it seems to progress a little bit easier.
Right. It became clear over time for sure. But let's see how it goes. I didn't have the goal at that point. Although as I approached age 50, I thought this would be a neat goal. I'm going to do a 50K. So I did put that stake in the ground. So it's like, okay, now I got to get ready. I was running trails by that point, so doing a trail race wasn't difficult. But 50K was a long way.
Right.
So I just decided that, just for that period of time, turn 50, do a 50K. So I did that a month after my birthday. And then it just kind of kept going from there. And so, the goal setting kind of became a bunch of little goals before the bigger goal. Eventually I got to the bigger goal.
Yeah.
But I had a little bit more certainty that the bigger goal was attainable by that point.
There's so many nuggets, I would say, gold nuggets in your book. And I want you to kind of speak to, and I'm going to name these 4 things. You kind of broke it down into these 4, classify: research, meet people, ecosystem, and action. Kind of explain, I think I know, and when I got into your book, you explain it, but for our listeners, research.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. That was in the discovery stage. So sort of as you get into, some kind of journey, right, you don't really know about it if it's a new thing for you. So you got to figure it out. You got to figure out, how it works. And then you can figure out, your place in it. But in my case, it was a lot about kind of figuring out not just the running aspect, but how the whole thing worked. There are races. Races are the trail races. How often? Who puts them on? How that works? What do I need to do to prepare for it? What are some basic things? What equipment do I need? What do people do in particularly in as I started, it was trail running. So so I was observing everything. I was meeting lots of people. I was having relationships with the race directors and trying to figure out all these things. And there were some classics like what do you do at a trail race aid station? Now we know what to do at a running aid station. You go through, you blast through, you grab that cup of water, and you're taking off. Trail, I was watching all these people have conversations. They'd sample the food. It was a big buffet, and so I kind of got the idea. Aid stations at trail races are different because there you can eat more things. There's a variety. You should sample different things. You should talk to the people there. So that was a kind of a funny thing, but it wasn't really the way things went. But it was my initial impression as I got into trail racing. But the idea of sort of figuring out the rules of the game, how things work, the equipment that you need, the training that you do, all that's very important in understanding sort of the context as you go through that first discovery stage for what your journey, will be done within. So that was important to me to figure all that out, and it didn't take all that long, and it was really enjoyable too because at each race I was learning something new and meeting new people and just having a good time, and so it definitely set the stage for a much, much longer and durable journey.
And I think the message is no matter what part of your life, in a career, in a hobby, in whatever, this is great advice. I've gone to bike rides. I'm into cycling now, and we'll have a group ride, and somebody will show up with a clunker mountain bike with and we're all on our carbon fiber racing bikes, and this person had no clue whatsoever what they were jumping into, and it puts us in an awkward place because we want to be friendly and welcoming, but then you see this person that came in, they didn't even have a water bottle with them. They just said, hey, there's a bike ride. I rode a bike as a kid. I'm going to go join these guys for some biking. They probably think we're going to do like Dick around the block.
Right.
Dick tells a great story about around the block. Sounds like once around no, it was a 4-mile run around a section. They called it a block. But if you didn't know that, you're going to jump in and you might get such a negative taste in your mouth and so the research and the meeting the people, I think that's critical, because I don't know about you, Gary, but I found most people are very happy to help a newcomer or somebody's just, if you're just there saying, hey, I need some advice. Can anybody give me some? Oh, trust me.
Right.
We'll get it. And so, and then the ecosystem, is that kind of what you're talking about, is the mechanics of the system, the aid stations, the registration.
Just sort of how the integration of people, of organizations, how all that kind of comes together, and for me out in California at the time, it was a robust ecosystem. You could race every weekend, and there's an abundance of trails out there in Northern California, and I never got bored. And I raced a lot, and I really enjoyed it. And I think you start to see some of the same people. You get to know them as running friends or as friends. Period. And it just becomes a big community. And so that, it was another thing. It kind of, brought me into this whole thing. So, I at some point I got to feel like an insider versus coming from outside, going into a situation that I was unfamiliar with. Eventually I was familiar with it. And I was, one of a bunch of folks that were out there doing these things. And it was really great.
Well, you eventually became a pacer. We didn't have that back in my day. Dick, I don't think when you were racing. No. But, to be a pacer I think would be a lot of responsibility, because you're taking a bunch of people that are kind of putting themselves in your hands and saying, hey, get me to a 4-hour marathon. Get me to a 3:45. Get me
done.
And, and if you do it, they're patting you on the back and buying you beer and stuff. And if you mess it up, but yeah.
Pacers are amazing. Over the years, after I got done with my faster running days, I can't tell you how many people said, oh, Beard, you ought to be a pacer. You'd be a great pacer. No, I would be the worst pacer in the world. Back in my younger, faster days, I would go out. I had no idea how fast I was running. I was trying to win the race, so I'd be out in the lead pack. And when you're up in that lead group, you're doing surges to try to break somebody. My pacing, I would have been the worst pacer in the world. I admire folks like Gary that are spot on. And I tell you what, folks. If you run a half marathon, a marathon, and you get into that pace group, I guarantee you, if you can stay with them, they will get you under that time. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I think, Gary, then your last point, action. I think in a book you said, do it. I think Nike says, just do it. But anyway, I think that's the key. Dick mentioned it too, that getting that step out the door or getting that starting at that starting line. I mean, what a commitment. It takes a lot of guts.
You got to do it, and you got to take yourself out of a comfort zone to do it in many cases. Yeah.
Well, you took yourself out of the comfort zone big time between 2010 and 2014. And I kind of like how when you said I've run 100 marathons after the age of 50, a marathon or longer, and I have no problem with that. I always laugh. There's some memes on Facebook where it shows the face I make when somebody tells me I ran a 5K marathon.
Right.
Because, that tells you they don't know what they're talking about, a 5K marathon. Right. But a marathon, traditionally, 26.2 miles.
Right.
Anything longer than that, ultra marathon or marathon, if you would. And so I'm just jumping ahead because we'll run out of time. Between 2010, your first one, a 50K, and I love the picture in the book of you sitting there. You don't look like you ran 50K. You look pretty happy in it. Well, and your kids are beaming. They're so proud. And and I think that's a memory I can't imagine you'll ever forget, is having your kids there to watch you do that after just a few years earlier struggling to get through a 4-mile fun run.
That's right. That's right. It was a few years earlier, and it was about 30 miles
longer
difference there.
Yeah, so and if people can't do the math, 50K, think of a 10K as 6.2 miles. Well, 50K, take it times 5 and you'll get it on 62 miles. But then you had this 2014 in the book. It talks about this back surgery, and I love the name of a chapter, Chasm of Uncertainty. What was the story behind that?
Yeah, tell us about that, Gary.
Yeah, the back thing was it was kind of a pre-existing condition, for before I started running. That was part of the problem that I had in my 40s and contributed to my decline, because when you have something like that, it's hard to do other things. It's hard to do the things that for fitness that you'd want to keep doing. So I did struggle with that. It went away for many years when I started running, but it resurfaced, and that was a challenge. But I knew it was going to be a big problem. I couldn't walk. I couldn't, I had to like bend down every 50 feet. And, I was trying to manage it medically with some painkillers, and that wasn't going well. And so I knew there was going to be a problem. And I actually got to the 2014 Marine Corps Marathon, and it was, I had intended to run it. And my daughter decided to run it. So it was going to be her first marathon. And so we go out the day before to pick up the bibs. And I'm stopping every 50 feet, bending over, trying to decompress the spine. And people are looking at me with my packet, right, with bib and stuff, and say, "You're not going to run, are you?" No, I'm not going to run. And so, we got to race day, and I thought, well, my sister was running as well, so I'm going to go out and I'll at least get to the start line and send her off and then go back to the hotel and have breakfast with my parents, who were also up for the event. And so I go out. You have to wear your bib because you go through security near the Pentagon. And so I put my bib on, but I didn't really take my race things with me. I had my phone. So I go out there and so things happen. We go forward and we get, in the chute and all that. I'm standing around. I figure, well, as soon as it starts, I'm out of here, right? And then the gun goes off. I wasn't paying attention. The gun goes off, and it's like, well, I can't really get out now because everybody's moving forward. I'm getting sucked in. So I figured, well, I'll get out before the start line somewhere. But it's too crowded. So I couldn't get out. So I crossed the start line. And now it's like, now if I leave, it's a DNF. Well, did not finish. So I don't want that. And so, but I thought, well, I can't, there's no way I can do this. So I'm going to have a DNF. And so, and then I had breakfast with my parents. So I had my phone. So around mile 3, I call my mother and I say, look, I'm going to try to get there for breakfast, but I don't think so. I'm running. And so maybe I can catch a taxi somewhere.
Now, are you hurting pretty bad at this time? Is your back kind of giving you problems?
I was. But I was so, at that point, I did take a lot of ibuprofen. Not something I recommend, but it was taking the edge off a little bit. And then the adrenaline was taking some of the edge off. Being with my daughter was taking a lot of the edge off. And so, I called my mother and I said, just in case I don't make it for breakfast, I'll see you at mile 22. And so I ran, and I just, it wasn't fantastic. There was nothing noteworthy about the run. It was my slowest run ever, slowest marathon of all of them. But I just kept going, and one thing after another. My daughter left me around the 10K. My sister left me around the half. I ran into another West Point classmate out there. I actually stopped and talked to Bart Yasso for a little bit. And so I just kept going. And then mile 22, I saw my parents.
That had to fire you up a little bit.
Oh, yeah, it was everybody that they didn't know. They had seen my daughter pass ahead of me. So they really, they were sort of wondering if I'm ever going to make it to mile 22. And, so I kind of gave them the, oh, yeah, I got this. So that they didn't worry too much, but and I knew I had it. It would be a matter of time, and so so I kind of got it done, and then 3 weeks later I was in back surgery.
Wow. But Gary, I got to tell you, being an Army Ranger, I mean, my son was in the Army. He wasn't a Ranger or anything like that, but that had to toughen you up physically and mentally, knowing what you had to go through in that training, that doing this, even with a bad back, it's like, I can do this.
Yeah. Well, I knew I could. I just didn't know the damage, it would
Right.
ultimately have. But I knew I was in a bad state anyway. And so it was sort of like, if it contributes to the damage, they got to fix it anyway. So
Been there, done that.
Dick Beardsley motto. They'll figure out a way to fix this if I mess it up really bad.
Right.
All right.
So
right. I'll get more for my money, so to speak.
Exactly.
You recovered from your back surgery. I'm going to jump ahead. So over the next 5 years, you went from 36 marathons up to about 72. And I love some of the chapters you have in there, obstacles versus limitations. I think what you just described, your back was an obstacle, and you could say it was a limitation as well, but it wasn't a limitation for you to perform that day. It was an obstacle.
So that's the question. It's good that you bring that up, because that's how I kind of looked at it. And I look at a lot of things too that way. Is it the limit? If I reached my limit, like I'll never run and never would have run a marathon at your levels. And so that was a limit.
Sure.
I wasn't going to run that level ever. And you sort of, to be realistic, you have to kind of recognize that. But the question of whether the back problem was just an obstacle that was recoverable and not my limit, that was valid at the time. I didn't know exactly, but it's really something that you have to consider. Is it a limit? And then you got to kind of redirect from that point. Or is it just an obstacle that you can find a way around or through? And I think in the case of the back surgery, it was an obstacle.
And probably in anything in life, career, employment, is it an obstacle or is it a limitation?
Right.
And I think that's where your book, I found, parallels. It's not just a running book.
No, that's what's so neat about it.
It is. And even though that's the focus and that's kind of what we're looking at, you can translate this into other areas. Chapter 18, strength comes from within. I don't know why. I just love the name of that chapter. Because,
tell us about that.
Exactly, because when I'm reading about your exploits, it's like, man, where does a guy get this inner strength? We're not talking like world record strength or anything, but the perseverance.
Right.
And that's where your upbringing. What do you think? Is it just is it nature or nurture?
I think it's probably more nurture. I got to give a lot of people a lot of credit, for helping me along the way there. Way back from my parents, my father at a very early age, took, got me out, got me physical, was kind of working with me on things, and never by mandate or anything. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being with my dad, and I enjoyed doing those things to kind of build, particularly the physical side, and then build functional expertise in some of the sports that I played. Then I got into high school, and it was a whole other level with some coaches there, very very specifically. I used to be picked up by the superintendent of schools, Bill Zimmerman, to work out in the morning before school, and he did too. He set the example. He worked out with a group of us, but he used to pick us up so we could all be in the gym at 6:30 in the morning. So that kind of happened early. I had a couple of great football coaches, Rick Moyer, freshman coach, and Joe Lucas, varsity coach. And, they were just sort of instrumental in sort of putting some of these things in my head and in my body, from a very early age. And that kind of carried forward. Cool thing about, I got to tell you this story about Coach Lucas. So now, over 80 years old, we had lost touch over the years, but a couple years ago we reconnected. And so, he kind of knew of my exploits. He lives in the Boston area. So he said, I'll come out and watch you run the Boston Marathon. I said, Coach, that would be great. It'll be my best, the best 20 seconds of my race to see you out there. And so we agreed we're going to meet, right at the edge of Etsy Street. I told him within 5 minutes of when I'm going to be there, because I knew my start. I didn't know how long it take to get to the start line, as from Boston. Right. For us non-elite runners, we have to start in the back, and so it takes a while to get to the start line. But I figured within 5 minutes, and so he was there. He was there right at Etsy Street, around 4 miles, and ran up. He didn't see me coming. then he saw me coming, and we had a moment. That's for sure.
Bet.
And so many years, and with what he had done for me and all that, just tremendous. And
well, Gary, and I think if anybody that's been successful at anything in their lives, there's people involved to help you get there. And if anybody says, "Oh, I did it all by myself," well, they're outright lying. There's so many people. Like for me, whether it be with my fishing or with my running, there were so many people there that made such an impact on my life that I can't even address all of them because there were so many of them.
Right. Yeah. And that I want to address some, but you're right. There are so many, and I'm really I'm grateful for them. But when you ask sort of how that strength from within happened, that's kind of how it happened. A lot of people helped that process. It got me to internalize these things. And I don't believe that strength comes from outside. Look, I was yelled at a lot in the military, right? That's sort of the style. Do more push-ups, whatever. I don't care about that. That never had any effect. I could laugh at it. I could, I could mock it. But really, the thing that really would get me motivated would be internal. It was never somebody yelling at me to do something faster, better, whatever. So I think that's really the thing that people need to accept. You might get a little near-term motivation if somebody says, you better do this. You can run faster and all that. Okay, maybe for a second. But really, especially when it comes to a journey and goals and all that, it should really come from within.
It's your book. I took a few notes. Chapter 22, Rim to Rim. A lot of people don't know about that, but the Grand Canyon. Explain, the Rim to Rim is like a 35-mile round trip.
Oh, well, I kind of cut it short a little bit, but it depends how you do it. There's lots of different ways to do that, from South Rim to North Rim to the other South Rim. There are kind of three trails, and what we ended up doing was starting in going down one on the South Rim, and then running across, to the North Rim. But a quick calculation, didn't want to finish before midnight, so we started like at 5 or something. So we had to kind of change the course plan a little bit. But really fantastic to see the Grand Canyon from the bottom.
Oh,
and if you do it by running, as with most things, right? By running, you cover a lot of ground a lot faster than you would by walking.
How long was that event for you then? How many hours?
Well, we started at 5 and finished just before midnight.
So
5 in the afternoon or 5 in the morning?
No, morning. 5 in the morning.
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
So we're talking 18 hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the temperature, the weather and temperature changes you must go through from the top to the bottom has got to be incredible.
Yeah, it was right. It was very cold in the morning, but warmed up for sure.
Yeah, right.
Right at the bottom. Yeah.
I love it. Chapter 24. Sometimes it's just about showing up. I love that one too.
Oh,
you went on to become the 50K national champion for your age group. And you're going to say yes because I was the only one who showed up that was that good, or something like that.
Yeah. Yes. It's a national championship. It's one race. Yep. It was in California. So, all those fast people from the East Coast probably didn't want to come out there.
They're lost.
But, I think in life, there's a lot of that too, right?
Yes.
Sometimes you just gotta do it.
Right.
And sometimes, you by showing up and doing a reasonable job, you're the one, you're the winner. And so I think there's a message there too. And so sometimes, get out of bed, show up.
Yes.
And do it. Good things can happen.
Dick, I bet you've had some of your best fishing days when a lot of guys said, I'm not going to go out today. It's a little windy or a little chilly or something like that.
Absolutely. Like Gary just said, it's just about getting out there and just doing it and not like where I live in northern Minnesota, winter's like 6 months, it seems like. And there's days when it'll be 40 below actual temperature. And you layer up and you go out the door and people think you're crazy. But, it's something that if you enjoy doing it, even when it's that cold, what keeps you from doing it? Not the elements. It's mainly your mind that says, I'm not going to go out today. So you fight through that kind of stuff.
Talking about horrible conditions, Gary, talk about 2018 Boston. That you haven't.
Oh, that must have been miserable.
Gary was there.
Yeah, that was that was a race where you knew from the start it was going to be a hard day. And so, from from strategy perspective, I knew my previous race plan was, out the window. I'm not going to do that because there would be too much risk. Not so much that I was worried about, the effect on my body, but, I was worried about pushing myself to a point where, something like a hypothermia.
You guys explain to people what happened.
What the conditions were.
What
happened? Well, I think it was one of, if not the worst weather Boston's ever had, one of.
Why? Why was it so bad?
A combination of rain, of cold, and wind.
Ugh.
And everything conspired against you. And I don't know how that could, all kind of come together that way. But I do remember leaving my hotel in the morning to catch the buses, and in 5 minutes I was just soaked.
Oh,
and it's like, this is, like other people were trying all these things, and they probably got soaked too. But it was just too, you couldn't avoid the elements. The problem is that you had a long time between leaving the hotel in the morning and actually starting the race.
Right.
So being so early for hours before was really pretty tough. So I had all these clothes on, right? That I thought, well, I'm going to show up at the start line, and I'll take all these off at the start line and all that. When I got to the start line, none of it came off. I was so cold. I'm going to run with all this stuff, and other people were the same way.
Yeah.
And so it was a brutal day. And in that particular race, as you know, the winners on both the male and the female side were very, very much underdogs. So it was sort of, all the favorites, they had a tough time. They dropped out, and it gave a chance to.
Oh yeah, and they were even the elite runners were wearing pants and tops to try to. I mean, Desiree. She ended up winning it in like 2:36 or something like that, which, most years that you wouldn't get a sniff of the finish line before the winners came across.
Yeah. No, it was a great day. Great in a in a storytelling sense. Well, but the a couple things that happened there. I got to tell you one kind of story. It was so bad that I stopped at a porta potty in the Newton after you make that turn by the fire station. And it was so comfortable inside there because you were shielded from the rain, shielded from the cold for just a few seconds. And I thought, 5 more seconds, I'm going to stay in here, and then I'm going to charge out. And so at 5 seconds, I just absolutely enjoyed that 5 seconds, and then I was good again. I came out and I up with renewed vigor.
Like a little oasis in the desert.
Was there any thought about just staying in there? The heck was finishing the race.
Well, that's another thing. I knew that if I waited too long, that was a ticket to a DNF.
Right.
As people found out that went in the medical tents, they made that too luxurious in there. They had a heater in there, and that's what I heard from somebody who did go in there, and they served hot chocolate, and so But I already knew if you go in there, you're not coming out of there.
No, you're
done. Run anyway. Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Well, so and then that gets us into 2019. So you've been on this roll ever since your back surgery in 2014. We're going into 2019, and Dick and I both know what's going to happen. But why don't you go ahead and explain during a 5K, like a neighborhood, I call it a fun run.
Right. Yeah. So I was coaching at the time at a downtown running store here, Fit to Run, in St. Petersburg, Florida, and so we had this a joint thing with a local brewery and it was a fun run. It was around the March timeframe. So the theme was catch the leprechaun on St. Patrick's Day.
Sure.
Right. So send the guy out with a 1.5-minute head start, and the first 9 people to catch the runner win. Right. So it's competition, right? So well, as soon as the gun goes off, I take off at some crazy pace. And to go and to go catch the leprechaun, and I tap him on the shoulder after mile 2. It's a 3-mile run, so I had plenty of time there. Mile 2, I tap him on the shoulder. I was the 6th person to catch him, and that was it. That was it. After that, several hours of I don't know what happened, but I know what happened now. But I didn't remember anything.
What happened?
And so really, what had happened is I had a plaque rupture, and that plaque rupture was in a major coronary artery, and it caused that artery to completely occlude. or near completely occlude. They call it the widowmaker because most people don't.
Oh, no.
So there I was. I had done a face plant into the ground, so I had no notice. I just dropped. Well, I did stop my Garmin watch first, though. So.
Of course, we all do that.
See the heart rate go plummet, even on my heart rate graph there in the Garmin stuff. So anyway, I woke up 3.5 hours later in the hospital with a few stents, and we're kind of wondering what in the world what happened.
The story in the book is,
and then it was but then it was pretty quick. It was like, okay, this is the situation now. Just like in a marathon, you're in the present mile. You worry about the present mile and that you're in. And so I kind of looked at it from the standpoint of, okay, what do I need to do right at this moment? And the first thing I needed to do was get healthy, and then get out of the hospital. And then I can kind of figure out some of the later things. But there was a little bit of, the whole, strength comes from within kind of thing. I had to make some statements there too. So first thing I had to do was complain about the food that they were serving. So that would guarantee me a faster discharge. But the other thing too, though, and it was meaningful to me, is I went out in my running clothes. Came in my running clothes. I went out in my running clothes.
Oh, that's cool.
Well, Gary, this is right up my alley.
The other thing was that, and I didn't realize this until later, but normally they escort you out and you got to sit in a wheelchair and somebody picks you. I said, forget that. I'm not doing that. I'm walking out on my own 2 feet in my running clothes, and we're going to take a picture outside. And that was important because that, like being against the tree there in the other scenario and the 1.5 miles into that 4-mile race, being outside the hospital, in my running clothes was the first step and first day of my rehab.
Well, and Dunn was a cardiac rehab specialist for his career, so you can really speak to this, Mikey.
Oh, this speaks volumes to me. And your book, you do a great job. There were participants in the race, doctors, paramedics. They saw you go down like a ton of bricks. It doesn't take a medical professional long to figure out this is not normal. This is not just somebody having a bad spell. They were on you like white on rice, as we used to say. And basically, I don't want to get too dramatic, probably saved your life, because when that LAD, left anterior descending artery, that's the widowmaker. It feeds the whole left side of your heart, which is the left ventricle, which is the pumping chamber. It's what pumps the blood everywhere. And so if that thing gets occluded, time, they always say time is muscle. So they got you into the hospital. These guys kept you alive. They got you into the hospital. They were able to open up that artery with stents, which is just fantastic. The great news for you is, from what I interpret from your book, is no long-term. We always worry about ejection fraction, about the pumping force of the heart. Did you lose muscle tissue? Doesn't appear to me that you did, and so that's fantastic. I think the best part of your story.
Credit to those people that a couple people, Jackie and Chris, that jumped on the CPR right away. Yeah. The paramedics came. They got me to the hospital right away. They didn't mess around too much at the hospital. They got me into the cath lab right away. So, it was, for me, it was a long evening, but, about 11:30, it was all done. And it was like, okay, now we can start the rehab.
Well, now a lot of people listening to this are going to go, whoa, back up the truck. This guy he's been running for 9 years, off the charts running. Yeah. How in the world did he have a heart attack? And working in the field, and this too, life, plaque is an inflammatory response on the inside of an artery, and arteries are living things. And if they get irritated, and what causes irritation, you name it, diet's part of this with high cholesterol. Stress, I think, is a huge one. And Gary, I kind of was wondering, I'm sure you've done some contemplation on this. You don't come across to me, you're a driven person. And even though I'm looking at you, I don't know you, but, with your career in the military, with your career in business, CEO, founder of a company, you make it look easy, but you can't judge a book by its cover. Internally, my dad came across as a really soft-spoken, easy. Dick knew my dad. He joked. Right. My dad was a jokester.
Great.
He was one of those greater generation, World War II veteran, Battle of the Bulge, age 18. You can imagine that. He never spoke of it. He kept it all inside. He never showed that. It would sneak out with anger occasionally, and so stress is huge. Diet, everybody thinks of the complete book of running, Jim Fix.
Jim Fix, yeah.
Yeah, genetics, another component that I don't know yours at all, but there's so many factors that involved, and soft plaques can sometimes be the worst. I'd rather have a calcified solid one because that ain't going to do anything. It probably won't change for years.
You know that well, Mike.
Yeah,
you know that
so
well.
yours, that hard
exactly
effort to
right.
catch that leprechaun caused, and I love in your book how you explained you and your doctor sat down and said, look, we need to figure this out because I'm not going to get to the rocking chair and sit on the front porch, for the rest of my life. I see you're thinking that wasn't even an option. And and so you guys came up with this, well, let's use that rate pressure product. And a lot of people, that's heart rate and systolic blood pressure, a combination of those two. And just on a side note, if anybody's listening, if you know what your resting heart rate is, if you don't know, check it in the morning, lay in bed, find your pulse on your neck, your wrist, count for 1 minute. And let's just say it's 70, 60, 80. Then if you know what your top number of your blood pressure is, that 120 over 80, well, multiply the 120 and let's say the 80. I can't do this in my head. But if it's below 10,000, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. If it's above that, your heart's working harder than it should. And so it's kind of a way to measure oxygen consumption of your heart. Well, you and your doctor figured out 160 would be a safe heart rate for you to proceed on. Because, again, obstacle or limitation.
That wasn't, to be honest with you, that wasn't tremendous science there. It was kind of taking a shot at, what would be a realistic estimate of extreme exertion. And I figured if I can stay under that, then I'm okay, relatively. But I'm not going to go over that. That was sort of one of the precautions that I took, immediately after, to make sure that as I was building back up again, that I was going to do it as safely as, I could. And so, no end of race sprints. I threw that out. No 5Ks. I got rid of that. No more 5Ks. And so, there are things that over the years I've modified a little bit, but things at the time I thought were pretty prudent. But then within those constraints, then, I could figure out a staged plan to get me back again. I ran my next marathon 6 months after the heart attack.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, Gary, listen, we're getting short on time here.
One
so in
last
2024,
thing,
go ahead,
Mike. Thing. The thing about COVID, I did not know this. Dick, you might have noticed this, but to find a race during the time of COVID was like almost impossible because there were so many health regulations on groups of people coming together. But Gary talks about a race. I don't know where it was. And he said, okay, we're going to do this race, but everybody has to wear a face mask. Well, and I don't think this was wintertime. Dick, you're used to wearing a face mask. It's 40 below. And he said, okay, you didn't have to put it over your mouth and nose. You can wear it around your neck. But if you if you pass somebody, if somebody's passing you, you're supposed to quickly flip this thing on your face. And I started laughing, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. And you go on to say in the book, most people, I didn't see anybody flipping that damn mask on or off. Is that true?
Man. Yeah, it's one of those things where you want to get the race approved. These are the conditions you have to agree with. The race director. I was conversing with the race director on this, and he said, "That's what I need to do." I said, "Good enough."
That's amazing. And so, if anybody wants to, I think your book, and we are going to wrap up here. Your book is just full of these lessons and examples that I think anybody could take to heart. They almost humbled me in many cases, because I've tried to do some ultra cycling and stuff. And let me tell you, we have a race across the state of South Dakota called the gut check. You do a lot of gut checks. And I think in the military, you talk about going internal and all kinds of stuff. And these are things, though, that sports and athletics, you can learn from, and in life in general. And so, I think this. I'm gonna, I give your book.
Well, thanks so much to both of you for that.
I'm gonna highly recommend if
distinguished people yourselves. I really appreciate that.
Well, Gary, and let's talk about your book just real briefly here. Okay, it's a great book, whether you're a runner or a non-runner. I highly, highly recommend it. So how can folks get your book, where it's available? Can they buy it at a bookstore, get it online? Tell us about that, Gary, if you could.
It's on up on Amazon right now, 100 Marathons After 50. So, go to Amazon. It's got a good write-up on it, and it's got a fantastic testimonial from a guy named Dick Beardsley on it as well. Thank you.
And I love the title because, we had a good friend, Brad Fowley, wrote a book called The Front Runner. I'd highly recommend that. It's a fictional novel. And when you go to the bookstore and say The Front Runner, there's several books called The Front Runner. I can't imagine there's any other books called 100 Marathons After the Age of 50. And that by itself sets it apart right there.
Well, that's it. That an accomplishment in itself. I mean, I've run about 100 marathons, but that's over 50 years of running. Here you did it over the age of 50, which is unbelievable. And so, Gary, we want to thank you. We want to thank all of our listeners for listening today. And if you have any questions for Dunn or myself, comments about the show, you can contact us directly on our website at beardsanddunpod.com or leave us a comment on our Facebook, Instagram, or X, all at Beards and Dunn Pod. And Mikey, you got a few things to say?
Yeah. And on YouTube, of course, if you watch this on YouTube and you like to see our I always joke and say our pretty faces, we'd love to hear from you. There's a place that we'd love to have you subscribe, and then you'd get notices whenever a new podcast comes out. But Gary, again, I want to thank you myself. I really enjoyed our time together, and I think we all need to go fishing someday.
Yeah, we got to make that happen,
Thanks,
Gary. Yeah, thank you, and all the best with your book.
Well, thank you very much. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys. Take care.